This NMRA-PCR Coast Division eClinic features George Carpenter talking about Hart cars and his experiences from his youth, as well as his extensive collection of Canadian Railroad photos. This clinic was recorded on January 23rd, 2021.
I'd like to say a few words about myself to start. I grew up in Kinsella, Alberta, Canada, where my father was the CNR, Canadian National Railway, station agent. In fact, that top picture, that's my father standing there by express wagon. And I'll talk about the pictures here. The picture on the lower left is probably the first picture I ever took, about 1944 or 1945. It's 3500 CNR engine leaving the water tank, blowing the cylinders. And the picture on the lower right we'll talk about at the end. As I said, my father was the station agent there from 1937 to 1963 when he turned 65 and was forced to retire. And Kinsella is about 100 miles east-southeast of Edmonton on the Viking sub, which is on the main line from Winnipeg to Edmonton, and was originally the Grand Trunk Pacific line that went through town there about 1911. Population is less than 100, even if you count the cats and dogs. The big deal, though, in Kinsella was it was the largest gravel pit for CNR in Western Canada. And it was very kind to my father with all the overtime it provided. And it was very kind to me because it paid for my first 2 years in university. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I started spending all the time I could riding in the locomotives, steam locomotives in the pit, for hours each day. So I got a lot of steam engine time. And and they were small locomotives, like 260s and 280s, because the rail was very light. In fact, it was skeleton track sitting on top of the ground because it had to be moved all the time to keep up with the gravel bank being eaten away. I worked for Canadian National for 4 summers while I was going to university. And the first summer, I was put in charge of the gravel pit. So I was very close to home. You want to show the next slide, Phil?
Nope.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I started, well, after I graduated, I went to California here to Stanford for graduate school and forgot all about railroading. But about 1970, I kind of missed railroading, and we didn't take a lot of pictures at home or when I was working for the railroad. So I started looking around to see if there were photographs. And starting about 1970, I started buying anything that was available. So I currently have somewhere between 35 and 40,000 photos of CN mostly, and other Canadian railroads. And there's a few US things mixed into there. Phil has shown the start of 3 lists that I've given him, which we can go into a lot later, but there's one for steam locomotives, one for diesel locomotives, and one for everything else like passenger, maintenance away, revenue cars, and I love Canadian grain cars, cylindrical cars. So they're all on one of those lists. Next slide, Phil. Okay, this is something that I love dearly. This is a Hart Otis, or Otis Hart. I tried to look up Otis on the Google, but couldn't find anything about them. I'm pretty sure they were a US company. This car, called a Hart car, and I had probably about 250 of them in the gravel pit. But it's a kind of a unique car. It can be configured for center dump, and it can be configured for side dump. And as I said, the gravel pit was full of them all the time during the summer from about April to October. And as you might realize, the summer in Canada, the days are extremely long, like about 21 hours a day. So, loading cars, moving cars, dumping cars, we're taking, we're happening almost around the clock. The bill, you can see in the upper left, right up below the top rail there, is the builder's plate. And I wish I could zoom in on that and read it, but I can't. As I said, it was built in 1928, but it's been sort of refurbished and renumbered. The numbers have gone from 5 digits to 6 digits. 5 digits always used to be maintenance of way, and 6 digits is revenue cars. So I don't know whether the upgrade turned this into some kind of revenue car used by customers or not. Now as I said, in my day, they were all 90,000 cars. The uniqueness of this car is that there's a big hole in the floor from the trucks on one end to the trucks on the other end. In fact, you can see on the bottom side of this, there's sort of a hopper arrangement with a periodic series of wood or metal blocks in there for the closing. The hole in the floor is, as I said, from truck to truck, and the width of that hole is somewhat wider than half the width of that car. And that's basically a wood floor with timbers running lengthways, probably about 3 inches thick. See, and notice all that complicated, that pipe running from one end of the car to the other on the side, and hooks on the top and hooks on the bottom, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Let's see the next slide, Phil. Phil? Oh, that's okay. That's just another one of them. Next one, yeah. Here's a dilapidated old Northern Alberta Railway car in one of their museums, but it shows the interior of the car, and unfortunately it's the only one I've got. You can see the two doors in the middle of the floor. Each one of them's got 7 hinges on it, and for side dump operations, those 2 doors are closed. But for center dump, the 2 doors, you lift up from the center and lean them back against the sides of the car. And that forms a hopper to bring gravel in from the sides into the hole in the floor. And you see the gate at the end, that's at the end of the hole. There's still another 5 or 6 feet to the end of the car where the trucks are underneath. And you can see the near doors lying on the floor, and it normally would be standing up vertical. And along the sides of the car at the top is hardware to hold those doors in place. And in that first slide I showed you, the doors were at the far end, and that was never the case in normal operation. So maybe these are some kind of commercial revenue cars now. What else about this? Oh, in the very front of this, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 hinge spots right at the very front of that car. For side dump, there was a big metal plate hinged at those 4 places, and the metal plate carried over to the car in front of it, so that you could pull a big plow through these cars, and I'll show you that later too. Okay, the next slide. Okay, I only showed you half the car here because, as I say, there's the side doors are all hinged at the top, and that top rail. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hinges on this section of the wall. And the pipe there, about 2/3 of the way down from the top. There's 2 on each side, and you can see they meet at the middle, which is on the extreme right side of this photo. And in this photo, there's I think there's 5 hooks hanging down from metal pipes that are part of the frame of the car. So those are permanently mounted there. And down below them, there's 8 hooks pointing up. The top hooks are pointing down, the bottom hooks are pointing up, and then there's a set of chains coming down from the top and up from the bottom that are all connected to that center pipe. And the chains from the top are wound around the pipe in one direction, and the chains from the bottom are wound around the pipe in the other direction. And then over on the extreme left here, you can see that the end of that pipe has a shepherd's crook on the end of it. And there's a movable bar that's hinged down near the bottom of the car that holds that pipe in place, keeps it locked, keeps the car locked. The configuration that you see there right now is in the locked position. When these are being unloaded side dump, a team of men come along with little crowbars, hit that lock bar, and unload the pipe. Then will drop down into the lower hooks, and that frees up the walls, and they will rotate out from the side and allow gravel to come out each side of the car. And by the way, during the unloading in both the center dump and the side dump, the train is moving at a slow walk. So these men are moving around on the ground and on the cars, adjusting these pipes and allowing the gravel to drop out either through the bottom or in the side configuration out through the sides. Okay, the next. Now, strangely enough, I can't remember his name, one of the rail fans in Ontario went to a company called Shapeway and had a model computer printed. I bought a couple of those and they weren't cheap. Seemed to me, I paid for two of them like $150, but I was astounded that this particular car is available as a kit built model. And my two copies of that car now are back at my painter in Ontario. So I'm looking forward to having something to remember living in that gravel pit for a couple of years. The next slide. This is an actual Marion steam shovel that was in the Kinsella pit in the very early days. And you can see that 20+ foot cliff of gravel behind it. And you can see it took 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 people to run it. It was kind of a marvel. I would sit in the cab of those steam engines while they're loading, and this steam shovel would be on temporary track next to the cliff, and only part of this that moved is the boom and the shovel. The unit itself only moved periodically, like every 5 minutes or something like that, and would rotate on that stand behind the first man on the left, and it would reach over to the bank, fill up that bucket, wheel around and drop it into a Hart car. And it went on like clockwork, like it was computer generated. I mean, it was just a marvelous, just nonstop. And we would load something like 100 cars a day along that cliff. You know, that cliff would be close to a mile long. It took a lot of men, cost a lot of money, a lot of overtime. So that was replaced in the late 40s, early 50s by a tracked diesel shovel, which lasted maybe 10 years, but was somewhat unreliable. And that was followed by rubber tired front end loaders that closed out the pit in 1960. The next photo. This looks rather nondescript and it's not very well focused, but this is the key to unloading side dumps. See the Hart car there between the ledger wood and this nondescript work car. You can see the yoke of the big plow that is pulled through the Hart cars to unload side dump. And I'll show you another picture. I don't know if you ever heard of the word ledger wood. Yep. But it's a big cable puller. And so when they're getting ready to dump side dump, this plow in that car would be placed at one end of the loaded train. The ledger would be placed at the other end. And this nondescript car, you can see on the top of it is a pole up there. The locomotive and that car would pull up beside the ledger wood, and that pole would be rotated around over the front of the ledger wood, and the cable on that ledger wood would be connected to that pole, and the engine and car would then depart for the other end of the train, pulling that cable all the way down to where that plow is. So, as I said, the plow would be at one end, the ledger would be at the other. The locomotive would be behind the ledger wood, applying, I'm not sure whether it's steam or just compressed air to run that plow, but a group of, well, the train would be set in motion at a nice walk, comfortable walk, and 4 or 5 guys would be climbing on those cars, tripping off the pipe on the side to open up, and the plow would come along through the car and over those metal plates between the cars. And eventually all those cars would get dumped out the side. There might be a spreader behind the plow car that would trim up that gravel either in the center dump or the side dump. And off they'd go back to the terminal, and those cars would head back to the gravel pit. So these cars don't look very impressive, but they're the whole key to dumping those side dump Hart cars. And this picture was taken in North Edmonton yard. They probably had 2 or 3 trains going out to the branch lines and the main line. I actually saw a train of side dump cars being dumped near Kinsella. It was a very fascinating scene to see how everybody knew what they were doing and how that gravel got out of there so smoothly. The next slide. Phil. Yeah, here's a picture of an actual Lidger wood, and that's a commercial company. They used to make lots of, they made units for pulling in timbers from forests and stuff like that, and for the marine industry. But that big wheel, which they've pulled up out of that Lidger wood with the hoist, they probably could run off 2,000 or 3,000 feet of cable from that winch, and then pull that plow through all the cars that are in that train. And the guy standing there is Norman Corness, friend of mine, who provided a great deal of pictures to me. He may well be dead now. Next, there is that. Yeah, here's another Lidger wood with a 35,000 282 engine. All of that group, the SCN, put their different locomotives in different classes. This is an S-2-A engine, and there were 20 of these, and those engines were frequent on the Viking sub. You'd see 3 or 4 of those every day. Next slide. Oh, I didn't say earlier, but the gravel pit was about 1 mile square, and it was down about 150 feet below the main line. And this is a photo I took in 1961 from our farm. We had a summer farm down near the gravel pit where we let the cattle run free during the summer. And I was down there back from California in summer of '61, took this picture from down in the valley. And the reason it's kind of interesting, as I told you earlier, the steam locomotives down in the gravel pit were pretty light. And the best of them could only pull 7 or 8 full Hart cars up the hill of about 150-foot grade on the siding and make up a train. When I was in high school, there apparently was a washout somewhere around Edmonton, and they needed emergency gravel. So they stopped a mainline freight and took a pair of F7s, and there's an F7 on the front of this locomotive. They asked it to go down into the pit and pull out a train of cars. I went with them so I could get them through all the switches and down to the face. And the 2 F7s, 1,500 horsepower each, hooked up to 30 gravel cars and walked up that hill just like there was no train behind it. I was just flabbergasted. So, by the way, that high fill used to be a wooden bridge originally. Next, Phil. Yeah, this is just to show you that other railroads had Hart cars too. I took in Battle Creek, Michigan in 1993. I can't read any numbers on that, but the whole side of the yard was filled with them. The next. This is a Grand Trunk Western train of 7 or 8 Hart cars on the way to dump them, I guess. But it's a pretty nice scene. Next. Okay.
So this is probably me more than George. So one of the things George told me was he's scanning all of his photos with a high resolution scanner at a 20 megabyte size, which is about 8 megapixels, an 8x10 print. When you go through it, it's about 7.2 megapixels. And so one of the things he's being very adamant about is that, and I wanted to show everybody because this is, I think, kind of important. When you look at the detail in the pictures you saw, those are actually JPEGs of that resolution. So they tend to retain the same resolution. So if you look on the right here, the right are basically the kind of scans that George has done. The next 2 scans are kind of typical of what you get from a 2 to 4 megapixel camera or a lower resolution like on your iPhone. And what I found was interesting in these pictures was if you look at the bottom of the 7, it actually has a tail on it in the font. It's kind of a unique font and that little tail at the bottom. And what's interesting is when you get down to the 2 megapixel photo, you really can't see it any longer. So one of the things that George has said is he's really scanning everything at a high resolution. So I thought it was kind of important to understand why that's important. So I'll throw it back to you, George, for kind of talking about where you are with your collection.
Yeah, I've scanned all 10,000 or so steam photos, and that amounts to about 120 gigabytes of digital files. And I have scanned almost all of what's probably 8,000 photos of passenger cars, maintenance away, cranes and spreaders, and all the on company service cars. I've scanned all of the revenue cars. No, I've still got probably 400 or 500 yet to finish off the revenue cars. And I said, I love the cylindrical Canadian hoppers, and I've probably got 500 or 600 of those yet to scan. And there's then another 20,000 diesel photos, of which I've scanned at least 1,000 or so, and we'll probably keep at that. I am still working part-time for the Air Force, so I'm trying to juggle all these things, and I'd love to sit there 8 or 10 hours a day and scan, but that's not happening. But you want to go back to those lists, Phil?
Sure.
Well, as I said, I've kind of organized this, and they're all in Word files, which I can scan to some extent. I know that you would all love to see them in PowerPoint or whatever, Excel spreadsheets. But I've listed the engine numbers, I've listed the classes, I've listed the types, I've commented on the scene. and I tell you what the media is, whether it's a slide or a black and white photo or a color photo. That's the way I can find them, at least if I know they're a slide or a print. I've got about 25 boxes of slides, 750 in each one. And so that's how I find which box they're in, by knowing whether it's a color slide or 8. And most of my prints are 8 by 10. I do have smaller. And so these lists are available to anybody that wants them. I think Phil listed my email address.
Yep. Yeah, your email
And
address is actually here, and I'll put it up in the text. So basically, George has these Word files, and so if you're interested in looking for something particular, you can use. There's a search function, find function, right up here in Word. You can kind of see it on this sheet where my cursor is. So if you're interested in something, you can use find and kind of search and try to find something specific, or just scroll through it. So.
This is Charlie Bedard. George, good to see you again. Even
Yeah,
if
hi,
it's only
Charlie.
electronic. Yeah. So I've used George's index, and to be honest, it's fantastic. I've been looking. You can see in my background, I've been studying Jeep 9s for a while. I saw a couple of Jeep 9s on that shot that you had with the F unit on the front. I thought that was awesome.
Yes, exactly.
But what I was able to do is, using his index, I was able to look for a specific location in the area that I'm modeling, the range of years, the color schemes, and even specific unit numbers and class numbers. And like the one behind me, which I'm modeling, George was able to pull out exact, 4 or 5 shots from different angles, so I could validate details, color schemes, custom details, and so on. So it's an awesome collection. So thanks, George, for all that work.
You're very welcome.
Jeff Reed with a comment. You said that several railroads had cars very similar. I'll comment that Santa Fe, which I'm a nutter for, has a bunch of gondolas that they called Caswell that they originally built, and they rebuilt them, and they're dead ringers for your hearts.
That really?
Yeah.
Okay.
They originally used different locking mechanisms that unlocked each gate separately. But when they rebuilt them in Cleburne, they put a solid rod like you talked about on the Hart gondolas. Otherwise, and so the rebuilt ones are dead ringers to the hearts. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, I got to love those Hart cars, and they put me through 2 years of college, so
there you go.
It worked out.
So anyway,
George,
I wanted to jump back here for George. So, if you're interested in helping George completing the scans, so, it sounds like he's about halfway through, and clearly the only comment is it does require probably kind of an above Costco grade scanner, not the cheapest kind of scanner to do that. It takes some serious effort to actually get the scans aligned and do them right, or doing them through Photoshop. The other thing, and George is interested, is talking to a few different museums and looking at placing the photos at the California State Museum. So if anyone has information on that and is interested in talking to George, please contact him. So back to you, George.
Well, I think that winds it up for me. As I say, I juggle between working for the government and working for myself. And I thought I'd have all the miscellaneous cars and what scanned by the end of 2020, but I haven't. It takes me about 5, 6, or in an extreme case, 10 minutes to scan a slide. I insist that everything that is vertical in the scene be vertical in the digital image. So I sometimes I'm lucky I can scan it once or twice and be done. but I've scanned some photos as much as 5 times before I get everything lined up the way I want it. So I can't necessarily insist that anybody else do that, but I guess I'm almost 84. I'm not sure I will get all the diesel slides scanned, but I'll keep working at it.
That's good. Well, with that, any other questions, comments?
I just wanted to ask George, what is the scanner that you're using, or do you have different ones for different types of material?
Yeah, I bought a simple slide scanner for about $400, and I found it was too fussy. It took too much time, but let me just turn the light on and give you the brand name. It's a V700.
For people who are interested.
It's an Epson V700. It cost me about $700 years ago. I'm surprised I haven't worn it out.
Nikon makes a CoolScan 5 or CoolScan D. And
I've got that.
That's a relatively inexpensive, really easy to work with slide and 35 millimeter film scanner.
The thing
it
that
takes about 2 minutes to scan.
Yeah, the scanning time is trivial. It's the adjustment and all that takes the time. I've found that the Epson 700 has got a wonderful light adjustment in it and color adjustment in it that's automatic. Whereas that CoolScan, it's very fussy. You're going in and you're adjusting the reds and you're adjusting the blues and before you know it, you've spent an hour or good part of an hour getting it perfect. Whereas the Epson, that's almost all automatic. I do have to go in occasionally and readjust all the colors, but this could take almost the darkest slide, underexposed that you might have in your collection and throw it in there and you can almost light it up to normal very easily. So I've gone almost exclusively to the Epson as opposed to the Nikon.
Well, thanks, George. That was really, really cool. It was fun to see your passion for the pictures. And the thing I always find when you look at these things so amazing is how much technology has changed the business of transportation of goods. The picture of those 9 people standing in front of that steam shovel loading gravel contrasted to the pictures of a modern coal mine in Montana where they're taking the top of a mountain off and they've got shovels that are 10 times as large and one person doing the equivalent work of 9 people plus. And it's amazing how you can see how much has changed. So I think we really all appreciate that. It's a great view into the past that we often don't think about.
Well, I've often thought about, I had intended to go back to Canada after graduate school, and the railroad offered me a job, and I could have been involved in the whole electronic change and everything in the railroading, and I know that would have been a lot of fun, but I didn't.
Well, then you would have been living in the cold of Canada instead of the warm of California, too.
Well, we Californians treat winter as something you drive to in 3 hours and come home the same day.
We visit weather. We don't live in it. That's great. Well, thanks, George, and everyone. Give George a hand. Thanks much for coming and talking with us today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, George.